Hello and welcome to the show. Now, I've got something very exciting today, and that's, did you know that if you sit around too much in your office, at home, around the breakfast table, everywhere that you sit, that you could be cutting your life short? Now, I've got Dr. Ziyaad Essop here, and he's going to tell us why we should not be sitting around too much. Watch this one. Dr. Ziyaad Essop, occupational medicine specialist. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Now, for starters, I know we have an exciting topic today, and that's sitting and why we should not be sitting around all day, which we've become accustomed to doing. But before we go there, let's talk a bit about you and your profile and what you do as a specialist, because I think that many people out there are not very sure what your specific designation, what you guys do.
Okay, basically I am an occupational medicine specialist. So an occupational medicine specialist does not treat only an individual, it treats the work environment as well. So we don't operate purely on a clinical level, we can operate on an operational level as well. So I've actually completed my medical undergraduate degree in 2006. I then went on to complete my postgraduate degree at the University of Stellenbosch, and that was the Masters in Occupational Medicine, as well as my fellowship in occupational medicine as well. So we don't purely operate on a clinical level, we operate on an operational level, and we monitor the work environment, and these are legal requirements. We need to understand what impact does the work have on a person's health. So that is just one of the aspects, but it's a fairly broad discipline.
Correct, yes.
Because I need to understand the legal background, I need to know about compliance, I need to know a variety of diseases and illnesses, which is not normally covered from an undergraduate level in medical school.
So basically your job doesn't entail what the normal doctor does, and that's sitting there all the time, sitting in some clinic, and somebody walks in and says, my ear's paining and that kind of thing. You don't do that. You go into the workspace, find out if that is conducive from a preventative point of view, and if there is a problem, you come in there to find what that problem is all about.
Yes, I agree with you. What we focus on is risk-based preventative medicine, and risk-based preventative medicine is covered in various pieces of legislation. So it's actually mandatory for major companies and even businesses to actually have these risk assessments, and based on a number of factors we actually develop surveillance programs. So we tend to look after the workers. So we also need to ensure whether the worker is wearing the appropriate gloves, whether he's wearing the appropriate mask, and if he's not wearing it, we need to take that into consideration, and we actually need to see what is this particular worker exposed to in the development of a particular work-related injury or disease. So it's a complete different spectrum. So if you're exposed to a certain substance within your work environment, you can develop a number of diseases. I'll take, for example, let's assume I am working in a chemical factory, and I'm within this chemical factory, I'm not wearing gloves, and the chemicals make contact with my skin, and after a few years I develop a dermatitis, which is a dermatological condition. So that is the impact that the work environment can have. So from my side, what I would do is I would do the legal side. There's a compensation system. I also need to advise the manager of that particular company to say, by law you are required to provide that particular person with gloves. So there is different ways of treating. It's not only providing medication for the individual, but it's also treating the entire work area, and also putting mechanisms in place so that the other 10 individuals do not develop that particular skin disease.
It's a very interesting component of what you're saying with regards to medicine, because I think that many people today, if we look at the time that we spend, for example, in the 24 hours, a certain percentage of that is sleeping and the other part is at home with the family or our friends or whatever we do. And the balance of that, which is a big balance, is in the workspace. So a lot of the issues that could arise from people medically could be in the workspace. So the area you're working in is a great area. Taking that discussion forward, I know that we want to talk about sitting, and we do a lot of that at work. Now, recently when you came to talk to me, I then realized how dangerous sitting around was, apart from picking up weight and doing all the other things. Can you do a sketch on the dangers of sitting and how that could shorten your life?
Okay, I'll just like to just paint a scenario. You get up in the morning, you sit down, you have breakfast, you're in your motor vehicle, you sit for another hour.
You sit down again.
You sit down again for another hour.
Yes.
You then at work for at least 8 hours a day. You sit at least for 7 to 8 hours. You go home, you prepare a meal. You between 2 and 3 hours, you sit in front of the television. So as you can see, sitting is not just confined to your work environment. Actually, sitting is fairly broad, and we sit in different, how can I say, sorry about that. We actually sit for quite extensive hours. I mean, if we add up all the hours, it works up to over 11 to 12 hours a day.
Per day. And now the balance of it, you are laying down and sleeping.
And the balance of it, you're actually laying down and sleeping. And just as smoking has negative health effects, sitting also has negative health effects.
Now, I remember when we chatted about this, you said, let's call the show "Sitting is the New Smoking."
Yes, so just as smoking has severe negative health effects, so too does sitting. And just to name a few of the health effects that sitting has. For example, it increases the risk. So the whole concept here is risk. So there is an increased chance of you developing metabolic diseases. And some of the metabolic diseases include hypertension, diabetes,
which is your blood pressure.
Hypertension, which is your blood pressure, 100% correct. Diabetes type 2, which is associated with impaired glucose or sugar levels, and then increased cholesterol as well. So those are some of the metabolic diseases.
And all of those that you mentioned, although it be very few that you mentioned, they are all life-threatening down the line. They're all going to give you serious issues and decrease the way that you live your life from a quality point of view.
Yes, I totally agree. So it's decreased not only in quality of life, but also in the number of years that you can actually, there is actually a number of years that sitting can take away from your life. So those are just the metabolic diseases. But there's additional risk associated with sitting, and some of the additional risk would be, for example, obesity. So it increases your chance of obesity, which is increasing your body mass index as well.
So that old saying that you hear your mother saying, "Are you just sitting around and getting fat?" That's really true.
That is really true. And if we look what has happened over the past 50 to 100 years, with the whole concept of industrialization, we have people actually moving away from the agricultural industry. We have people being replaced by machines. So they're actually moving quite little. And human beings are not designed to be sitting every day. They are actually designed to be moving. So with modernization, there was also a decrease in the activity levels, and we tend to be bound with office jobs.
I love the idea that you're saying that, because let's look at a typical factory. I think in the past there was all these machines and people were physically turning the cogs and turning the wheel and doing whatever they're doing to make that machine work. Today that machine is linked up to a server and a computer that you press a button and it spins at a certain speed and does the work for you. So everyone's sitting behind the desk.
I mean, I agree with you. And not only is it obesity and those metabolic diseases that I have mentioned to you, it's also the increases the chance of developing cancer. And recent data from various studies from North America actually suggest that there's an increased risk of developing colon cancer, breast cancer, as well as endometrial cancer. As you know, breast and endometrial cancer is associated with women, and there's also an increased risk of prostate cancer in males.
Are you able to tell us what the actual link is between sitting and prostate cancer, for example?
Okay, yeah, there is some data. There's a lot more studies that needs to be conducted to actually establish.
But currently they found, looking
They
at people
found,
sitting,
yes.
there's that link, and the information in between that is still forthcoming.
It's
on
still,
that, yes.
it's still forthcoming.
Yeah.
But the mechanism for the metabolic diseases, I can explain that to you, the way
Correct.
that it actually develops. So let's assume you sit down for about two hours. So what happens in that first 2 hours, number one? Your muscular activity decreases. So with muscular activity decreasing, you burn less calories, and that actually predisposes you to obesity.
Ziyaad, I think let's take an example.
Yeah.
And we're going to take your model now and put that over the example. For example, the average person today, the office-bound person, rocks up at 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm not going to count getting up to go make a cup of tea, because today most offices are ordering the tea lady to bring the tea. So let's leave all of that out. They're sitting there from 8 in the morning till 4 or 5 in the afternoon. But let's give and take a lunch, walk, or something like that. The person is sitting there for 6 or 7 hours a day. Right? Take us through the timeline of what's happening to your body every day from the time you rock up at 8 o'clock, after 2 hours, 3 hours. What's starting to happen?
Okay, as I mentioned to you, the moment you start sitting, there's decreased muscular activity, which is number one. Then the calories, there's less burning of calories, which predisposes you to obesity. Now let's assume you sit for greater than 6 hours a day. So during the first 2 weeks, if you continue sitting for 6 to 8 hours a day, then the recent data is actually suggesting that there is decrease in some of your enzymes associated with breaking down various fats in your body. So those changes, we're actually starting to pick that up after 2 weeks. And let's assume you continue to sit...
After 2 weeks already?
After 2 weeks for 6 to 8 hours a day.
I just bumped into someone this morning that told me, I'm doing my job, this is my 10th year now. So they've been sitting for 10 years.
So let's assume it's 10 years,
Yeah.
and it's between 6 and 8 hours for a year, and that increases your likelihood of developing high cholesterol. I mean, so not only does it affect your calories, it also affects cholesterol as well. I can give you another example. Let's assume you isolated to your cubicle. So what I've been discussing is the health effects, but there's also the mental effects. If you confine to your cubicle, and if you sit between 8 to 10 hours a day in your cubicle, due to various changes in your physiological mechanisms, some data is suggesting members are predisposed to low mood, predisposed to depression as well.
So this is the typical call center environment, for example.
Yes. So what I've been discussing is actually new information and new data. But there's another aspect. So think of sitting as a piece of the puzzle. So if we look at sitting, and if you're sitting in the incorrect posture, or if you are performing a task or an activity at work, there is a range of musculoskeletal conditions as well. So that would mean back pain, that would mean neck pain, that would mean shoulder pain, leg pain. So that is all musculoskeletal conditions associated with the activity. So as I mentioned, there's the musculoskeletal conditions, there's the metabolic conditions as well, and then there's the increased risk of cancer as well. So those are the three broad categories that I've mentioned. And yeah, and the new evidence is actually the metabolic conditions, the increased risk of cancer as well.
So we look at this timeline and we see that we come to work and we start sitting all day long, and that rolls on into the 2 weeks you spoke about. When you blink again, it's 5 years and 10 years that you've been doing that, cutting down and chipping away at the time you're going to spend on earth, and chipping away at the healthy lifestyle or a quality lifestyle. So we've determined that. What's the actual processes? For example, you're saying that you're sitting and your cholesterol eventually starts going up, all those things starts happening. Doesn't all of these have a rollover effect? So your cholesterol's up, that will have an effect on your hypertension, and from there you might have renal problems, or you might have cardiac problems. Is there not a rollover effect by simply sitting?
Yes, I agree with you. There is the rollover effect, and it can manifest in many ways. I mean, it increases your chance of death after, I mean, as you said, 10 to 15 years. It takes away the number of life years. It just predisposes you to various other conditions with those particular risk factors. As I said, the heart problems, it predisposes you to cerebrovascular or stroke. And yeah, so those are just some of the conditions where all these factors can lead to. And added to this is, if you are sitting, and if you're sitting for long periods of time in front of the computer, we tend to eat non-nutritious meals. So by you not eating the correct food, that adds to the risk for you to develop these diseases.
So now we're not going to change the world. From the time that the Industrial Revolution started, we see this advancements that we call it, but disadvancements when it comes to our own health and well-being. As technology advances in a certain way, we're taking the back step. I mean, we no longer have conversations. We sit and WhatsApp people outside the room, for example. That's a separate matter. We're not going to change the world. We're not going to stop the technology. It's only going to get bigger and better while we're getting worse. How do we change that for ourselves? Because I cannot see an environment where my staff, for example, or any other staff is going to spend more time doing physical work now in this day and age. They are actually just getting more and more behind the desk and more behind the computer, doing all kinds of things. We're not going to change that. But what's the middle road to say that we understand the problem you mentioned to us is real and it's happening? How do we not become victim, maybe not full victim, maybe halfway? How do we meet it halfway?
Okay, so like everything, we need to start somewhere, as you mentioned. So the whole idea is to have this self-motivation. So you need to tell yourself, the chair is the enemy, okay? And you need to tell...
That's a good one.
So
the chair is the enemy. I'll
and
remember that one.
What makes the chair worse even is now we have wheels and people are lazy, they tend to slide around in their chair as well.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're sitting on chairs that don't move, so right, you're going to have to get up to go to that side of the room. But the one on wheels, you're really going to now ride that way.
Yeah, and
I mean,
I've done it before, and I'm sure you've also done it before.
Yes, of course.
So it comes with self-motivation. And with self-motivation, you now need to look at your day, or what is your activities. So for example, if you're working between 6 to 8 hours a day on a laptop or at a computer screen, you need to be able to break it up, break those hours that you're actually sitting with small bursts of activity. So that would mean for every 45 minutes in front of a computer, you need to get up, you need to walk for at least 10 minutes or perform some type of exercises. And recent data is also suggesting, although you may be 6 to 8 hours, you may be sitting, and if you decide to go to the gym for an hour in the evening, that does not negate the effects of sitting for 8 hours. So I'm not advocating not going to the gym. Continue with that.
No, but I hear what you're saying. You are saying that you can't sit there all day long, then decide, I'm going to balance this tonight out.
Yeah.
It's not going to work.
It's not going to work.
You've got to do it on the fly as it's going.
Yeah, so it's breaking up every hour with at least 10 minutes of some type of activity. Let's assume, for example, you feel that you need to drink a cup of coffee. So instead of asking the colleague or the cafeteria to deliver it, rather take the steps and walk to the cafeteria, order your cup of coffee. If you need to give a message to your colleague, instead of emailing your colleague that's sitting 2 cubicles away, rather get up and walk to your colleague. If you need to hand some type of an account to the account section, instead of using the elevator or the escalator, you should rather walk down. And I think what should actually be happening is they should actually start making elevators and escalators coin operated, so that would force you to actually walk.
Correct.
Yeah.
Now, you're mentioning something interesting about walking to go and do a task. I recently conducted a small test in the office because I knew we were going to do the show. And I've got this little pedometer that's running on my phone, and we decided, let's check out the distance. So on an average day, I've been walking 0.7 kilometers per day in the office. So get home at night, I've only walked 700 meters. That was the average day. One particular day I decided to not use the PABX system, which we normally call all the staff and where's this, where's that kind of thing in all the different departments. And I left that thing on my table. I walked to all the tasks. Plus, what I did was I decided to just keep getting up from my desk every 2-3 minutes and just scratching around somewhere. And in the office, I covered 8 kilometers.
I mean,
8 kilometers.
That's amazing because that's what we actually need to start moving towards. That is the perfect.
I did it for one day, it didn't last, but okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's the perfect example. Instead of emailing, instead of sending the forms to the account section, rather get yourself more involved in activity. Another example within the workplace would be, instead of sitting, try to organize a standing workstation. Instead of...
I actually tried it. I was at the airport the other day and the flight was taking its own time and there was this shelf that, you know, once you come through, there's some shelves. And I put that there and I was going to wait there for half an hour. I saw all the little chairs to sit on at the gate. But I went to go and stand there. I must admit, I only lasted 15 minutes and I thought this is a bit too much now.
Okay.
that one doesn't work for me.
That would normally happen.
Now, your advice to, I understand that you're saying we need to move a bit more and stuff like that, but just added on to that, just some advice, especially to the younger generation that has now lapsed into something else, and that's they are sitting more than anything else. They're coming now from school. They used to be part of the cricket club and the soccer club. They're now part of the iPad club and the Galaxy and whatever they're doing, and they're sitting there all day and they're Xboxing and all those kind of things. They have become the epiphany of couch potatoes. Now, what's your advice to them? They need to start getting up.
I totally agree with you. And what we've actually noticed, or a lot of the research that has been done is conducted in the adult population. So what's actually happened now is we need to take that a step back. During our young days, we were probably playing cricket or playing soccer, and young teenagers need to get more active. Okay.
Because think about it, Ziyaad, you're saying that over 15 years or 10 years, you're going to see some effects. Now, when we reached the work environment at 24, 25, whatever it was, and we take our 10 and 15 years and add it from there. I know this is just theory from my side. You add it and then you say, okay, that's where it's taking you. But the kids are starting at 5 years old. So you're saying by the time they become 20 years old, they're already going to have problems.
Yes, and what we actually need to start looking at is we now need to start looking at the data that we have for adults. We need to start conducting research and actually see what's the long-term implications. So yes, it will predispose them to the same or similar medical conditions that adults can develop. So this might be developing on an earlier stage. So those medical conditions that I've mentioned to you, the metabolic diseases, the obesity, that might develop instead of from the age of 25, it now might develop from the age of 15 to 16. And to add to that, it's the impact of non-nutritious meals as well. So yes, you've mentioned the smartphones, you've mentioned the tablets, but added to that, it's the video games as well, which we completely forgot. And then it's the after hours watching TV. And some of the approaches to that would be same principle if you're sitting in front of your smartphone for an hour or your tablet, break it with different activities. So that would be something, that would be one of the suggestions. And also when you watching TV, then when there is an advertisement, rather get up and walk to a particular area and do some type of activities. So use the advertisement as an activity break as well.
Okay, I'm going to tell our guys watching TV not to leave the TV during the adverts, but to actually jump up and celebrate the ads.
Yeah, so you can actually stand in front of the TV and just do some exercises as well.
I was just kidding. One last piece of advice as we end the show. We understand that, yes, your employees, they're going to the employer. Their movement is sometime, and probably most of the time, determined by that of the job description. So this means that they've got to be behind the computer doing the counts and that sort of thing. Is there any advice to employers how they could get their staff moving instead, but by doing the same job?
Okay, so this can be approached from different levels. So first, from the employer side, which is the manager. So if he can gather his staff together and say, okay, we've acknowledged that our members are at risk of developing certain diseases, and this is how we propose that you can break up your day. So from a policy and planning level, so this can come from management, which is number one. Management can also introduce maybe wellness days to evaluate their particular members to see whether they are at risk and give them the opportunity to put corrective measures in place as well. Another way would be allowing your members an hour over and above the policy which recommends a certain period of activity during the course of a day. Maybe allow them an hour in the afternoon once a week to actually go and do some physical exercise as well. So that's purely from a management point of view. But although it can be very nice to have all those policies and plans in place, but at the end of the day, it also boils down to the individual. The individual needs to be motivated. The individual needs to realize if I'm sitting in an awkward position, I need to correct myself in that particular sitting pattern. And the individual needs to realize that he also needs to take ownership of his health. And there is actually various role players within any large business. There's the occupational health and safety officer, and there are designated people according to law, which you can actually bring in and develop a plan to address some of these issues.
Ziyaad, I think that's very pertinent information. I think it's a collaboration in the workspace between staff and the employee at the same time, because I'm thinking some of our staff definitely, if I must be giving off that hour, they're probably going to sleep. But that's just how things go. Ziyaad, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. I think that we've got to have you visiting quite a few times. There's a lot in your fraternity that can be spoken about. Sitting was just one of them. There's issues like stress and all of that we can talk about. I hope to have you back soon again.
It's a great pleasure being on your show, and I hope to see you again.
Thank you. Dr. Ziyaad Essop, we're talking about sitting and the dangers of sitting and how you could cut down years of your life if you continue sitting. More on my website at faizalsay.com. Until next time, goodbye. Thank you for joining us.